All right, so Malcolm is an in-demand speaker, having been engaged as the keynote speaker at over 150 events across the state, including the keynote for the National Day of Prayer. He is never advertised. All of his bookings come from word-of-mouth testimony by those who have had the pleasure of hearing him speak. Malcolm has a passion for his adopted country, and he believes that America is the beacon of hope and light for the world to follow. His speech will investigate how America avoided being destroyed by the left, how election fraud is a problem, but more importantly, that it can be solved. The founders gave the world a gift and the American citizen a gift. He will explain these as he touches on a range of topics, including how California won the election for Trump. That's what I'm curious about hearing, because I'm not seeing it, so that definitely got me here, you know. America's godly heritage, restoring America's role as the leader of the free world, the truth of the left's agenda and the 7 men who rule from the grave, election integrity, and why he fights so hard for our country. So,
thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I suppose I better start by saying, g'day. I have an interesting story. I grew up on a farm in Australia. I can still remember my father hitching up the horses to plough the fields. Anybody here remember that? I bet not. Oh, you do? You must be 90. But we had a great life, and we had 7 kids in the family, 8 originally. My sister died when she was 3. My brother died when he was 16. My father died when I was 16, and my granddaughter died when she was 15 months. So we had some traumatic times, but we had a good time growing up. Our parents were fantastic. When my brother died, my grandmother came to live with us. And she brought with her, and you probably remember this, a 10-volume Bible story. The Bible story, do you remember it? The blue book. And in that book was a picture of what I came to believe America was all about. And it was a picture, excuse me, of a family of 4. Father sitting down at the kitchen table. Mother in a perfectly ironed dress, permed hair, just come from the day spa. I didn't even know what that was. I thought she just got out of the bath. But the picture was perfect. 2 pigeon pair at the end of the table, perfectly dressed, and it was something we'd never seen in our family because we were working on the farm till 8 o'clock at night and just come in for dinner. So it was a beautiful sight. You know, they looked as though they'd just gotten out of the bath and combed their hair and in their best clothes. I mean, we used to have a bath once a week, whether we needed it or not. And I tell a story about my sister-in-law who came to visit us. And we had tank water, so we didn't have running water. We had tank water. And our Saturday night bath was mum first, followed by my sister, same water, by the way, and then the kids, dad last. It was just the way we lived. I mean, that's the way new people were coming to a country lived. They didn't have all the electricity and the hot water and all that sort of thing. But when she came to visit us, we gave her the privilege of having the first bath. And she let the water out. Absolute disaster. That was the end of the bath for that week. So we went. But growing up in that era and having my grandmother come to live with us for a period of time after my brother died, this Bible story books were what held me strong. I loved the pictures. I didn't know much about it. I hadn't been to Sunday school at that time, but my grandmother told us about who Jesus was and the stories, and she read them to us. One of the pictures, as I said, was a picture of an American family. What I came to believe was the typical American family. But what struck me about the picture most of all was who was standing outside. And as I said, I didn't know him at the time, but it was a guy in a long white robe, goatee, long dark hair. And when I finally learned to read, the caption was, if Jesus came to your door and knocked, would you invite him in for dinner? And that image and that picture of Jesus always knocking to come into your presence stayed with me my whole life. And every time I got into trouble, I would come back to that picture. Jesus, you're with me, gotcha. So I held on to that picture as a typical American family. And when we got black and white TV, I mean, I really firmed up that image of the American family because you had Father Knows Best all godly, wholesome programs. Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, The Andy Griffith Show, excuse me, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans riding off into the sunset to Happy Trails to You. Good job. So you're all my age, right? It's just been affirmed. I knew that America sang God Bless America before some of their events. I knew that you had In God We Trust on the Dollar. I knew Billy Graham because he came to my hometown of Melbourne, 150,000 at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. It was amazing. So I had this image of America being a godly and wholesome country. When I got to America in 2009, that image disappeared. I found a society that was looking for something, but it wasn't God. I came to Connecticut, and just as an aside, I did my due diligence before I came to Connecticut on politics, because I was marrying a US attorney who was running for Attorney General. And it was all blue. And I said, yes. In Australia, blue is conservative. So I was coming to the bluest of blue states, which was not conservative. So when I got here, I found that God was nowhere to be seen. He wasn't in the government. He wasn't in families. He wasn't in school. He wasn't even in the families or the church. And it bemused me, because this was totally opposite to what I expected America to be. It was all about material things. And it was confirmed to me that something was wrong when my wife ran for Attorney General and I was the cheapest campaign manager she could find, so I was it. And she ran for Attorney General, and in her platform she had freedom, faith and fortune. Well, the Republican Party demanded that she take faith out of her platform. And on the night before the convention, with 1,300 people in attendance, we were told that our nominating speaker was not valid, and we had to find another superdelegate, I should say. And of course, by that stage, all the superdelegates had been taken up by other candidates, and they couldn't do 2 nominating speeches. So I panicked, thinking that this is the first time I've run an election. I can't even get my wife on the stage. Well, our lawyer had just won a US Supreme Court reverse discrimination case in the US Supreme Court. And so she was known all over the state. The next morning we went into the Rules Committee and we called the chairman and we said, look, we weren't able to fix up that problem that you gave us last night, but we can tell you you've got a problem. And he said, what do you mean, I've got a problem? And my lawyer said, in this bag, I've got a court order to close down this convention, 1,300 people, if you don't put the rules back to where they were yesterday. Well, he was in a panic. There was 1,300 people in the room. And he went back to the Rules Committee, he came back, and he said, it's all good. Well, a few months later, when I was talking to the chairman of the party, I said, you know that briefcase that was there? There was nothing in it, mate. There was no court order at all. So we did the convention. We won the convention 67% to 15%. 15% was just enough for their candidate that they wanted to run to get across the line for a primary. We spent $20,000 in the convention and the primary. He spent $280,000. We won the primary 60.5 to 33.4. What it told me is that it's not about the money. It's about hard work. It's about believing in what you believe in. If you believe in God, be bold about it. If you believe that it's wrong to abort a baby, be bold about it. Speak to the truth. And that's what my then wife did. She spoke to the truth of what it was to be a candidate. She wasn't afraid. And all I can say is I admire her for that. When I came to Connecticut in 2009, my father-in-law gave me so many books: the Mayflower Compact, the Declaration of Independence, Constitution, the Federalist Papers, Jefferson's Diaries, Washington's War, Alex de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. And I consumed them. And one of the things for Alexis de Tocqueville is that democracy in America is an oxymoron. You aren't a democracy, you're a constitutional republic. And it really annoys me when politicians say, I'm going to DC to fix up our democracy. You're not a democracy, and we should call them out every time. But what struck me was Alex de Tocqueville's comment about if America ceases to be good, America will fail. And he believed that. And so after reading all these amazing documents, the Federalist Papers were just remarkable. I started to get interested in politics, get interested in what it is about America that makes it special. What is it about the American people that makes them exceptional? I've got a theory on that, but I'll talk to that later. But what is it about this country that has turned away from God? Well, as time went by, I ran a governor's race, and I ran a US Senate race, and I ran a congressional race, 2 congressional races. And then after my candidate for US Senate refused to step across the line, I said, I'm out of here. So I joined the Trump campaign. And I was blessed. I travelled the country. And what I saw was what I always thought America was about. I saw offices, Donald Trump's offices, filled with young millennials and young Z generation Christians. I went to churches. In fact, it was me that stopped the campaign working on a Sunday morning because I refused to. And I said to the campaign manager, I said, this is about Donald Trump and his belief in God. We've got to stop working on a Sunday morning so that our people can go to church. And so that happened. And our people went to church, and I saw these amazing young kids, the born-again virgins, born-again Christians, professing their love of the Lord. And I saw this right across the country. And the churches I went to were filled with young millennials and young Z generation. And they're going to be the hope going forward, those young people. But what I saw going around America was, 108 million Americans that don't normally participate. See, you normally have about 132 million participate in the elections, about 65, 67, something like that. And you have another 108 million Americans that don't get involved. They've never been involved in politics. Well, guess what? This time round, the demographics of the voting person in America included much of that 108 million people. If you look at the precinct map of America, it's red from sea to shining sea. The county map is slightly different, but the precinct map, and on investigation, that was 50 to 60 million Americans that don't normally participated in this election. They were waking up as we went around the country. They were waking up and saying, what the heck happened to my country? When did we decide to take church out of state? Well, the separation of church and state in 1947 was the biggest lie ever perpetrated by the American people, perpetrated to the American people. The Founding Fathers never ever intended there be a separation of church from state, only a separation of state from church. There's a big difference there. The Founding Fathers knew that without a Judeo-Christian foundation, this country was going nowhere. They understood that. The Mayflower Compact was written on 11th of November 1620, and they said in that compact, we give over these lands to King George and for the furtherance of the Christian faith. That was the founding fathers. That was the Pilgrims on the Mayflower Compact. They understood. John Adams, in fact, said in 1798 that our constitutional republic cannot survive without a moral and religious foundation. That's absolutely true. It cannot survive without that Judeo-Christian foundation. And that's what he was talking about. He wasn't talking about Islam or Taoism or Buddhism. He was talking about the Judeo-Christian foundation being absolutely necessary for this country to survive. Jefferson, which is what his letter to the Danbury Baptists in 1802, where he reassured the Danbury Baptists that the Congregational Church, which was looking very much like a state-run church at the time, would not be run by the state. And he said, thereby creating a Chinese wall between church and state. The US Supreme Court used those very words as one of the arguments for the separation of church and state. Big lie. And we need to have that debate with people when they say separation of church and state. You need to tell them that it is a lie. So these 108 million Americans were waking up and saying, when did we decide that we would shut up the pastors from the pulpit? Well, that happened started in 1953 with the 501c3 status given to not-for-profits, which meant that the churches were not getting the tithing that they thought they were going to get, because it was all going to the not-for-profits that were providing services to the community, something the churches were required to do. Well, in 1954, they said, what about me? And Johnson gladly gave them 501c3 status. It's the day the churches sold their soul for 30 pieces of silver, because no longer could the pastor speak to the truth to his flock, his community, about what was happening in politics, because separation of church and state. It's a lie. The pastors, like the male and the family, being the spiritual head of the family, the churches were the spiritual head of the community, and America was the spiritual head of the world. And we let that go. So in 1963, these guys were waking up and they were saying, when did we decide to take prayer out of school? When did we decide to take religious instruction out of school? Remember, the Department of Education was a federal institution. That was 1963. And that all stemmed back to the separation of church and state. It was a plan by the liberal progressive, Saul Alinsky-led people. It was all part of the plan to take God out of our society, which is one of the key elements of Saul Alinsky's Reveille for Radicals, which he wrote in 1971, released in 1971. So these guys were clearly upset about what had happened to their country. And then the coup de grace was this. When did we decide it was okay to kill 59 million babies in the womb? 59 million babies. It's up around 65 million now. We didn't. None of us here voted for that. The Supreme Court decided, 5 men decided that it was okay to murder babies in the womb. And now they've gone one step further. It's okay to murder a baby outside the womb. I pray every day, every morning I pray for a US attorney to rise up and take that case on and prosecute these people for murder, because that is exactly what it is. The Constitution provides for the rights of citizens the moment they are born. In my view, it should be from the moment they're conceived, but that's another battle. So these 108 million Americans were saying, wow, this is not the country that I thought about I was going to have. And so they came out and voted. They determined that it was right to vote. The evangelical Christians have a major problem. In the last election, 49% of the evangelicals voted for Democrats and 51% voted for Republicans. You cannot, for the life of you, vote Democrat if you are a Christian. Amen. You can't do it. You've only got to put the policies side by side. And you'll see that one believes in big government, one believes in abortion, one believes in gay marriage, one believes in LGBT rights. Now, they can have the rights, but we don't have to fold our whole society into their way of thinking. We accept that those things happen in a society, but we don't endorse them. So these 108 million Americans really did make a difference. You know, the liberal progressive left have been doing this for 71 years. Mr. Trump gave you, the people, the right to speak to the truth again, get rid of political correctness. It is political correctness that has mooted every one of the people in this room. I'm guessing we're all apart from you, June, we're all baby boomers. Hands up, baby boomers. Yeah. I guess we are. So you understand what I'm saying. The baby boomers are at fault here. We were the ones that said, look, we're not going to say anything against the liberal progressives because, wow, I might be labelled a homophobe. or a bigot or a misogynist or a racist. I don't want to tell Johnny, little Johnny, that he can't go to the next grade because he's not ready, because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want to tell that valedictorian that he's got a gig at the next end of school presentation, because it might offend somebody else that didn't get the valedictorian. And that's what's happening, folks. Everybody gets a trophy. We are lying to our children and our grandchildren. The little yellow bus is a favourite of mine. That little yellow bus, I would get rid of that in a nanosecond. Why? Because for 12 years of a child's life, of a child's schooling, we tell them that the world stops for you every time that bus stops. In Farmington, in Connecticut, 5 people have been killed after they've gone to college. They get off the public bus, they walk around the back, straight out into traffic. Because for 12 years they've been told that the world stops for you. We need to tell our children the truth about what it's like out there. It isn't easy, and we need to stop the lies that have been told by the teachers and the professors in college. But we remained boot, so it's our fault. We need to come alongside our young people and say, it's okay. Yes, you're going to lose friends because you're going to speak to the truth, and I'm going to be right there behind you. You're going to lose sisters and brothers and cousins, maybe even mum and dad. But you've got to speak to the truth because it's this country's future. It's your children and your children's children's future if you don't. Because we're just going to collapse under the weight of liberal progressive agenda. You know, America was always meant to be the beacon of hope and light for the rest of the world. America was never meant to be part of the secular pack. But the liberal progressive left want to bring America back to the secular pack, a pack she was never meant to be a part of. Why do they want to do that? Because America can be controlled when they are just part of the pack. America was not meant to be a part of the pack. It's meant to be that hope for the rest of the world to look to. And the Founding Fathers gave you a couple of gifts. Firstly, the exceptional American people, before they became America, gave the world a gift. They gave the world a gift of freedom, true freedom, not make-believe freedom that was in Europe and England at the time, true freedom that comes from God, not from man, not from a pharaoh or a king or a dictator. It comes from God. And if it comes from God, who's the only person that can take it away? God. We've got to believe that God is on our side. We've got to believe that no man, no matter who they are, can take your freedoms away. And look what happened from the moment you guys got your freedoms and gave it to the rest of the world. 1776, 182 years later, so 1776 to 1969, we went from horse and cart to what? Man on the moon. For thousands of years before that, we had the same brains, we had the same gifts coming out of the earth, but we didn't have the freedom to pursue. We didn't even have a visual idea of what it would be like to build something and keep it. That's what the Founding Fathers gave you. And then the Founding Fathers gave you another very, very special gift. This time to the American people. You see, they'd never been voting before. The Founding Fathers gave you guys the right to participate in the greatest constitutional republic the world has ever seen. And you know, it blows my mind when I see that only 50% of Americans come out to vote. It's a gift of participation. It's a gift of ownership in a process. But all I see is you've given it away. Do you know here in California how many people voted for Proposition 14? Do you know Proposition 14? It's top 2 primary, jungle primary. You know what that? Yes? Everybody understand what that is? Okay, the top 2 primary was voted on in 2010, and it meant that instead of having a Republican primary and a Democrat primary, and then the top 2, they all went into a bucket. No worries with that, right? I mean, you've got LA County that's got 8 million voters, you've got San Francisco. They're going to control who becomes the person that represents you. So it's a suppression. The top two is a suppression of the vote. That was introduced by none other, or pushed by none other, than New Way, California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, your governor, Republican governor. It was pushed further by Charles Munger, by Jim Brulte, and by the current GOP chair, Jessica Patterson. They are all never Trumpers, and they all believed that the top two primary was the answer. That's why I'm shocked about what happened in the GOP convention. So the top two primary, how many people voted for it? You've got about 25 million eligible voters here in California. About 12 million come out to vote normally. Well, for this particular top two primary, they held it in the off season when a few people would come out, and they held it in the primary, not the general. And only 5 million people came out to vote in the top two. 2.8 million changed the political demographics of your party here in California for decades, because we didn't value the vote. We didn't value the gift that the Founding Fathers gave us. And I pray every day that people's eyes will be open and understand just the precious nature of this great country, this great constitutional republic, that we will open our eyes and we will realize that we can make a difference. So they were the two gifts that were given by the Founding Fathers, and we need to take those gifts and treat them the way the Founding Fathers meant them to be treated. That it was a right, not a privilege. It was a privilege, not a right, to participate in the vote. So, as the election unfolded, these 108 million Americans made a big difference. And on election night, I was just amazed. So, I just want to talk about 7 men who rule from the grave. The 7 men who rule from the grave, let's have a look at them. Soren Kierkegaard died in 1855. He was a never absolute person. It's the only thing that is real is for the moment. If it feels right, do it now. Heard that before? If it feels right, just do it. Charles Darwin died in 1882. It's interesting that evolution was not mentioned until the sixth edition of The Origin of the Species. The 6th edition. And social Darwinism is now a fundamental platform of our primary schools. You look at what's being taught in our schools about sex education. You know, kids in grade 3 being taught how to put on a condom on a banana. Kids in year 8 being taught what it is to have a one-night stand. I'm going to embarrass a couple of people. How to do nipple rub. I had to look it up. I didn't know what that was called. You've got to understand that the liberal progressives, because we were moot, have taken over this country. And it's going to be a radical turn of events to take it back. Because unless we take it back, we're done. What about Karl Marx? I mean, that was a good idea. I mean, Karl Marx and Mao Zedong, between them, killed over 100 million people. And that's communism, the big brother of socialism. Julius Wellhausen, he wanted to destroy the belief in God. And he often quoted Alex de Tocqueville. Sigmund Freud, you've only got to do an inward-looking psychoanalysis and all your problems will be solved. How's that working out? One of my favourite guys, Keynes. You know, Keynes economics. I mean, in 1931, he advised your president at the time, I forget who it was. Who was it in 31? Hoover. That the answer to the Depression was government spending. Government to create unemployment. Government to create... it doesn't matter if you overspend. And, you know, he didn't even believe in that theory himself. And his words are still haunting us today with our trillions of dollars in debt. It's okay. By the time I have to pay it back, I'll be dead. They were his words. And then, of course, the favourite, our education system, John Dewey, federal education. I mean, it blows my mind. We don't have a right to participate in education. That's at the federal level. 10th Amendment clearly states that unless it's specifically given over to the federal government, it's retained by the states. And if it's not given over by the states, if it's not retained by the states, it's retained by the people. That's why they're fighting so hard, because they control the whole agenda of education on left, liberal, progressive ideas. I mean, they're not being taught about American history. No, they're not being taught about the truth of communism. That's why you've got thousands and hundreds and maybe millions of young people that believe socialism is the way to go. We need to have a debate across the kitchen table, and we need to say to our kids and to our grandkids, this is the truth. This is the truth of socialism. This is the truth of communism, its next logical step. And yes, we are going to lose people. I've already lost half my family because I supported Trump. I've lost half my family because I believe in what Valerie believes, that life begins at conception. I've lost my family because although I don't support gay marriage, because that's not the way God designed it. So I've lost my family, and we're all going to lose people that we love. We're going to lose friends. But the most important thing to do is to have that talk across the kitchen table. Because without that talk, we are going to be where we are now in 71 years, and we won't have a constitutional republic. We'll have whatever the left wants it to be, because they will change it. If Hillary Clinton had got into power, that wasn't the end of America's society for 40 years. That was forever. The American experiment was over, because she would have changed by executive orders. The Constitution would have been challenged up through the US Supreme Court, and by that stage she would have appointed liberal progressive judges, and they would have put it into law, because it's part of their agenda. That's why I abhor politicians that talk about progressive judges and conservative judges. I don't want either of them. I want judges that apply the laws in the Constitution as written. And we've got to stop talking about liberal progressive judges and judges that are conservative, because that was never the intent of the Founding Fathers. It was constitutionalists. I want to read a couple of things from Paul Harvey. Remember Paul Harvey, 1965? Who knows who Paul Harvey is? Well, I won't bother. But what happened in 1965 is Paul Harvey's oration of If I Were the Devil. So you all know it. So you know that that's actually happening now. Everything that he said is happening now. If I were the devil, I would create movies and literature that is off the chart and make it look good. If I were the devil, I would get a hold of the greatest country the world's ever seen, America. If I were the devil, I would take God out of the courthouse, God out of the schoolhouse, and God out of the church. Even now, religious liberalism is taking over many of our churches, because it's all about a relationship, and if it feels good, if I can get something out of my relationship with Jesus Christ, then that's good. But it's not about the true faith. It's about what feels good to me. If having sex before marriage is good, it feels good, it's going to be okay. But it's not okay. It's not the way it was designed. And that's why we have the problems that we have with young people. And they are told that it's okay to go and have an abortion. You think about this. Everybody know who Nick Vujicic is? Nick Vujicic is a young Australian. Oh, yes, he's young by my standard. Young Australian with no arms and no legs. I first saw Nick in 2008 in Australia. He was just starting off, and he was bouncing up and down on the table, and I was praying that he wouldn't fall off or bounce off. But what he said in that first meeting was, I ask God every day for a wife. And you know, me, I said, that's never going to happen. I had no idea the power of the Lord at that stage. I was still, like this. But his faith has held him in good stead his whole life. And can you imagine what we would be losing if Nick was aborted in the womb? You think about Helen Keller. Where would we be without Helen Keller? Where would we be without Lane Beachley, the #1 world woman surfer? Yeah, she was the product of a 17-year-old that was raped, and that 17-year-old was being forced to have the abortion, and she refused. Why? She said, "I'll adopt the baby out." That baby became the Australian Lane Beachley, and she is the #1 world championship surfer. And all the Down syndrome kids. I mean, I know Down syndrome people. They are funny. They are smart. They just don't look like me. I mean, neither does June. But I'm not down on June. So all these people have, the Liberal Progressives, they have Saul Alinsky as their leader. And Saul Alinsky has these 7 men who rule from the grave as the examples of how they want to run this society. I thank God every day that Trump got into power. You know, I believe that Trump was anointed. I met Trump many times, and I had a discussion with him in South Carolina. And I was in the office, and we sat down and had a 5-minute talk about the evangelicals. And he said, "Malcolm, how can I win the evangelicals?" I said, "You've got to believe, you've got to have faith, and you've got to trust in the Lord that he's in control." And he won South Carolina in a landslide. Trump is anointed, and people say to me, "Why would God anoint somebody like Trump?" Yeah. And I laugh at them. I said, "Well, let me think. There's a bit of history here, or a bit of precedent. Noah was a drunk. Moses doubted the Lord, couldn't speak 2 words. Abraham didn't trust God, so he slept with his wife's maid to have the first baby. Gideon wanted the fleece turned over 3, 4, 5 times before he trusted the Lord. David, he was a murderer and an adulteress. Paul, on the road to Damascus, what was he doing on the road to Damascus? He was going to a place where he could kill Christians. God can choose whomever he wishes to do his bidding, as far as I'm concerned. So, I mentioned before that how California won the election. And that's true. We had a volunteer base here in California of 330,000 people. We had 40,000 people at any given time, any given week working, and on any given day we had 10,000 people. I went to a meeting in Fresno with Steve Frank. I know Steve very well. I was his biggest supporter for the GOP convention. But, right? Okay. I'm not going to argue with Mary. But, where was I? Where was I, Mary? I went to a meeting in Fresno. Thank you, guys. I'm glad you're listening. I went to a meeting in Fresno, and Steve Frank was there. I didn't know Steve at the time. And also there was a number of people that I didn't know, Linda Payne, Ruth Weiss from Election Integrity Project, and Christian Adams, the #1 election lawyer in the country. And we all went around and he did an introduction. Christian Adams got up and he introduced himself and he says, "You know, while I'm up, I'd like to highlight Linda Payne and Ruth Weiss. Their organisation, Election Integrity Project, is the #1 election integrity project in the country. Their documentation is perfect. Their analysis is the best I've ever seen. Their documents for court are court ready. But he said, but California's a waste of time. And I thought to myself, do I get up now and go and punch him? Or, but being a Christian, I held back. I just stood up calmly and I said, Christian, California's not a waste of time. California won the election for Donald Trump. And he laughed at me. And I thought, this is not a good start to our relationship. But he laughed. And I said, you don't know what you're talking about, Christian. California won the election for Trump. And I told him 330, 40,000 on any given week, 10,000 on any given day. California was given 5 tasks. I had the phone call from New York, and they said, Malcolm and Tim, we want you to win 5 battleground states. We want you to win Arizona. And I said, yeah, we can do that. He said, we want you to win Pennsylvania. And I gulped a little bit. They said, we want you to win Florida. To double gulp. And then North Carolina. I thought we could win North Carolina. And then they said, and when he said this next state, I said it's 4 out of 5 okay. Because he asked us to win Michigan. Well, in the last week of the elections, we put 1.5 million phone calls into Michigan alone from California. You people that were on the phones for Trump. An exceptional state with exceptional people won the election for Donald Trump. Into those battleground states in the last week, we put 4 million phone calls into those battleground states. Our people were starting at 6 o'clock in the morning to capture the 9 o'clock start on the East Coast and just followed across the state. And when we could no longer ring in those 5 battleground states, we would ring in other states, Colorado. We put 14,000 people on the ground into Colorado, and Arizona, and other battleground states, on the ground door knocking. They were all volunteers and exceptional people because they didn't ask me for money. I just had to organise the buses. California sacrificed herself for the saving of the nation. And if it wasn't for California, give yourself the cup. If it wasn't for California, Trump would not be president. So don't ever give up on California. California's got 25 million voters, 7 million Democrats, about 6.5 million declined to states. And this is another thing about what's happened over the last 6 years. In the last 6 years, we've gone from 1.6 million more registered Republicans than declined to state to 600,000 less. We are the third party, and that's the team that was working in Sacramento. They have failed you as a people. They've failed California because they did no voter registration in that last 6 years. In last year, they had $35 million available to them. 35 million. And we lost 47 seats. Texas had 5 million, and they won 7 seats, I think it is. It's not about the money. It's about believing and getting out the vote. And that's what California did in that election. So anyway, I told Christian all this, and I said, mate, voter fraud is real in California. And I said, if we peel back the lid on California, the rest of the country will fall into place. And I said to Linda, we need to get together. And so I went and saw them after the meeting, and I said, I'd like to come on board to your board of, and they said, why don't you come on as the CEO? So I did. And the first board meeting, I said, what are you doing with all your election data, election fraud data? And they said, oh, we give it to the Secretary of State. Wow. What else do you do? Oh, we give it to the counties. I said, how's that working out for you? And they said, well, actually, it's not working out very well at all, because what they do is they take what we find as a deficiency and they introduce legislation to cover it. So we're just getting progressively worse over the last 8 years. So I said, why don't we try something different? So we went public with the 2016 election results and the fraud that we found in California. And within about 5 weeks, Washington Times, Washington Post, Breitbart, New York Times, and LA Times on the inside front cover in font 3, they reported that in California we have 11 counties with over 100% registration rate. Isn't that amazing? You guys are so dedicated. I'm just bemused by how dedicated you guys are. In LA County, there's 1 million registrants above the maximum that could be registered. just 1 million. In San Diego County, it's 138%. I can't remember the figure, but I remember the percentage, 138%. In one small town south of Los Angeles County, they had a 600% turnout. True story. Yeah, that's how dedicated you guys are. In fact, I got to tell you, my admiration for Californians is just, has no bounds. In California, in LA County, 23,000 people vote from heaven. That's how dedicated you guys are. And I found the fountain of youth. I found the fountain of youth. You guys thought I was actually 45, didn't you? I'm actually 105. LA County, over 9,000 people, over 108 years old, on the rolls. And across the state of California, 97.5% registration rate. It just shows you how dedicated you guys are. That you want to get out there and vote. What I said about not voting before, not in California. The bottom line is that that's all fraud. It's all, the voter registration rolls under the NVRA Act are not being culled. In one county, Chinese poll workers threaten Chinese voters in Mandarin and Cantonese, telling them this, and we have video evidence of this. We know who you are, we know where your business is, we know where your family is. We run the Chamber of Commerce. We know that your business is coming up for relicensing. Vote this way or you're done. Now, we have video evidence of that. That is with another organisation now. But the bottom line is there is fraud. And if we pull back the lid on California, what's the rest of the country going to do? They're going to fall into place because they don't believe that California can be caught. California is too far gone according to them. But we are peeling it back. And so I said to Christian what I'm telling you now, and he got up and walked out. Well, after 5 weeks of this evidence being out there, we had a phone call from Judicial Watch. And Judicial Watch came on board and as our legal team, and they sent a letter to LA County and Secretary of State explaining to them what they'd found. And those two organisations wrote back and said, there's no there. Okay? Well, they immediately issued a lawsuit against the Secretary of State and LA County, and those lawsuits were both won about 4 or 5 weeks ago by Election Integrity Project. Absolutely. Remembering, of course, that Ruth and Linda had been working for 8 years on this. In fact, just a little snippet of information. Linda is so dedicated that she mortgaged her own home to keep Election Integrity Project alive during those lean periods. Now, within weeks after Judicial Watch winning the lawsuits, and the lawsuits actually, the judge ruled that Secretary of State has to report to the judge, so does LA County, and the Secretary of State has to not only clean up LA County, but all 58 counties. And that's a direction from the court. And Election Integrity Project gets to vet what they're doing. Yeah. So, election fraud is real here in California. And the gutless GOP that you've got, when they introduced ballot harvesting, that law, that should have immediately been questioned because it's illegal, it's voter suppression, there's no chain of custody in those ballots that are being harvested. The last election, over 200,000 votes were harvested out of Orange County alone. Harvested. That's you, I don't know you from a bar of soap, you go down this street and you collect all the ballots, you help them fill it out, but there's no chain of custody, so I don't know whether you've taken those ballots and given them to the local registrar or not. Chain of custody is a principal requirement in our voting process. And yet, here in California, there's no chain of custody. So, but things are changing. I mean, with the election Judicial Watch. Landmark Legal has now come on board, and Landmark Legal is looking at the suppression of the vote and also the felonies from the Chinese community. So we can make a difference. But we can make a difference even more if we go out and vote. You know, if just 15% of evangelicals came out and voted biblical principles, this state would be red. And don't give up on California. I say to people that tell me they're leaving, the last time I checked, bad policy, bad regulations, and voter fraud doesn't stop at the border. It's going to follow you to wherever you go. And if you don't believe that California can turn, New Hampshire, they said before the election, will never again go red. Never again. Well, guess what? New Hampshire was lost by Trump by 2,000. But this is the kicker. New Hampshire had, after they certified the vote, found 5,000 illegal votes that put Trump across the line in New Hampshire, the state that would never ever go red again. You guys can do the same. So, on that note, I might just take a couple of questions. I thank you for your time. Just know that California is working really hard. I'm working with the election re-elect team, and we're not quite sure how we're going to run California. I don't think they really understood just what power we have here in California, that California sacrificed themselves in the last election to win the election for Trump. But we're getting to them. If we don't project California's strength in a coordinated way into those battleground states, we're going to lose this country. But my prediction, I put it up on Facebook today, Brexit, Lexit, Jexit, which is Jews exiting now, abortion and infanticide, and socialism, that's going to give Trump a landslide victory in 2020. Because the American people know the truth of what the greatness of this country, that it is a beacon of hope and light for the rest of the world, and God has his hand on this country. God bless you, and God bless America. Yeah,
we have a second mic.
I love taking questions.
You had your hand up first, so hang on. Let me get over with the mic to you so we can all hear it so it gets in the recording.
Just a couple of quick questions. The one major media that we somewhat have on our side is Fox. Do you think that their announcement that the House was lost early in the election night made a difference, number one? And number two, just a few of those statistics you give us, why don't we hear those more from them on this voter fraud issue?
Because they don't bother to learn it. Just on the House, a lot of people said that the midterms was a disaster for Trump. No, it was a big success. Since 1910, you've had 27 midterms. Of those 27 midterms, represented by, I'm not sure how many presidents, but of those 27 midterms, only 5 have ever gained in the House. And only 4 have ever gained in the Senate. And not at the same time. Obama in his first midterm, Bush in his first midterm, Clinton in his first midterm, lost more seats in the House than I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly Obama lost more seats in the House than Trump did, and he lost Senate seats. Trump won Senate seats. That's an amazing achievement in the first term, especially with all the negative media. And why, I don't know why they don't quote those figures. Maybe they don't know them. No, that's not true. No, the reporting of Orange County was that young Kim, she actually went to DC to do her training. It was all the harvested ballots that came in after. I mean, you had Andrew Rohrbacher, you had young Kim, you had the others. They were looking pretty good. Mimi Waters, they were looking pretty good, but it was the harvested votes that killed any chance of winning. So I can't remember Fox announcing that early. Oh, the House was gone. Yes, yeah, the House was gone, but not out of California. Yeah, but the House. What do you lose? 44 seats? Was that 44? About 44? Yeah, I mean that's lower than Obama. It's lower than Clinton. I mean, he did a great job, and those doomsdayers are just looking for an excuse to give you guys a heartache and depression going forward. Yep.
Excuse me, what is the name of your organization that you're talking about?
Well, the organisation that I used to be a part of is Election Integrity Project, California.
But you're not a part of that?
No, I resigned so that I could come out and speak to the truth to you guys, because it's a not-for-profit, and I was on the edge of where the organisation could be fined by the IRS. Because what I talk about Democrats and Republicans. I changed it. I don't talk about Democrats and Republicans anymore. I talk about Americans and liberal progressive left, because blue-collar Democrats love your country just as much as you do. They just have an Alexander Hamilton view of the world, big government, as opposed to a Thomas Jefferson view of the world. Okay, small government. But they still love your country. And they're the people that we need to target going into 2016. And I think with what's happening, with the manufacturing coming back, that's going to be an easy task. Yeah.
I have a question. So first of all, kudos to you. Fantastic speech.
Thank you.
What's going to happen if the Dems allow the illegal immigrants to vote?
Well, that would have to pass in the federal, in the Congress, and that's not going to happen because we own. I mean, that's a masterpiece of Trump. He didn't care about the House. Remember, he didn't go to any House seats. He wasn't worried about the House. He knew he had to control the Senate and gain in the Senate to protect him from the Mitt Romneys and the Alaskan and the Maine senators. Claire McCaskill, is it? And whatever the other person. Yeah. So that was the genius of Trump. He didn't go and campaign in those seats because he knew he couldn't stop the millions. I mean, 14 million, 30 million, whatever it is, into Orange County. But come 2020, those seats will be in play because they only just won them. They will be in play right across this country, and with those 5 key issues: abortion, after birth abortion, Brexit, Lexit, and Jetsit, and socialism. But they are in play because the American people aren't stupid. They know that America is great, and they know that if they don't come out and vote, America's lost. That's why you had the 108 million Americans come out. Okay, but Trump won the election. I believe he actually won the midterms by gaining 4 seats in the House, in the Senate. Yes, ma'am. So I've already put it on Facebook. In 2015, when he came down the escalator, I said, Donald Trump, Melania, next president and First Lady of the United States. And I got hammered because from across the world.
Of course.
People were giving me a hard time from Laos. My daughter lives in Laos. My other daughter lives in Canada. My family lives in Australia. I mean, I was hit from every corner of the world. I've had the last laugh. And I've done the same thing this time. I think it's going to be a landslide because of those issues.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
This is a comment.
Yes.
Your profile looks like President Trump's. Take a look from the other side. Actually, the other side. Okay, look that way. Look over there. I swear.
I wish I had his money. And if you want to donate some extra, I'm open.
Your hair doesn't do this though.
Well, I can make it look.
You need to grow out the hair a little more. Did you had a question over here? Okay, and then we should probably wrap it up after this question.
I'm all good.
Okay.
As long as you like. Gives me a chance to talk more about your great country.
You mentioned that we shouldn't give up on California and that we can help to turn the tide in the election integrity and stuff like that. What kind of things can common citizens do to help out with that if they volunteer with election integrity? Okay,
if you go to electionintegrityproject.com, electionintegrityprojectcalifornia.com, on there's a beautiful page which lists all the activities that they're involved in, and to sign up and be a poll watcher. So one of the keys to honest elections is having people there that are watching. And we don't have enough people supporting that process. If I'm standing here watching you, you're not. It's just like being a kid in the lolly shop. If mum and dad are with you, you're not going to touch those lollies. But if mum and dad aren't there, you might kind of slip one into the pocket. In fact, I did that when I was 6, and my brother dobbed on me. So, join Election Integrity Project. Donate to Election Integrity Project. One of the most critical things is funding, because defending the right of you to vote and defending the value of the vote doesn't come without a price.
All right.
Any others? Yep.
Oh,
Well, it doesn't, but I've recommended to the GOP that, and also to the Department of Justice, we've approached the Department of Justice to invalidate voter harvesting across this country and make it a federal law against those states that are doing ballot harvesting.
yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, is Trump Christian? Absolutely. You know, he has grown in his faith and his walk. He's the only president in recent memory that insists on having prayer before every department meeting. He's the only president that has given an Easter message from the White House. He invokes God and Christ every opportunity he gets. And if you haven't ever seen this, the Kim Clement prophecy of 2007, where he said, I will put a brash man in the White House. He will go in whispering my name. And after I baptize him in the Holy Spirit, he will shout it from the highest office in the land. And that's what he's doing. Thank you.